Beijing today isn't just the center of world diplomacy. It's becoming the stage where the map of global power is being quietly recalculated. And on camera, everything looks normal with smiles, handshakes, and short statements that sound calm. But underneath that surface, there's a current running far stronger than what's shown to the public. And the most uneasy actor right now isn't Washington. It isn't Beijing either. The real anxiety is coming from Tehran, because for the first time in a long time, there are signs that China is reconsidering how tightly it wants to tie itself to Iran. If that calculation changes, Iran loses the one economic lifeline that has kept it afloat under Western sanctions. For years, China has been Iran's biggest oil buyer, and without that buyer, many analysts believe Iran's economy might have collapsed much faster. When European and Asian firms pulled back to avoid secondary sanctions, Chinese tankers kept arriving. Oil flowed, money came in, and the relationship between the two countries looked solid, built on practical interests and a shared narrative of resisting American pressure. Now that foundation is starting to shift, and the center of that shift is the Strait of Hormuz. On a map, it looks like a narrow strip of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, but nearly 1/5 of the world's oil passes through it. If that route is disrupted, the effect doesn't stop in the Middle East, because gas prices in London and New York, electricity bills across Europe, and shipping costs worldwide all move almost immediately. What makes the situation dangerous is the change in tone from Tehran. What used to sound like rhetoric now looks like operational readiness, with drones, coastal missiles, and fast boats all put on display. From a military standpoint, it makes sense as leverage, but from a global economic standpoint, it's like pointing a weapon at the world's energy system. This is where the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping becomes more than just another bilateral photo op. After the summit, reports surfaced that both leaders agreed the Strait of Hormuz must remain open as a free shipping lane. On the surface, that sounds routine, but in context, it's a direct message to Iran, showing that for the first time, the US and China sound aligned on one crucial point. Neither wants a single country to control the flow of global energy trade. For Tehran, that's bad news, because there's been a quiet assumption that China needs Iran. But China's energy data tells a different story. Iranian oil is large as a share of Iran's exports, but small in China's total energy mix. Most of Beijing's needs are covered by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, Russia, and West Africa. And ironically, oil from those Gulf states also passes through Hormuz. So when Iran makes the region unstable, China loses too. Beijing suddenly finds itself in a difficult position, because on one side it doesn't want to lose Iran as a strategic partner in the anti-Western bloc, but on the other side it can't afford to let its own economy get dragged into an energy crisis just to keep Tehran calm. Domestic pressure in China is already high, with a weak property sector, slowing growth, and shaky foreign investment. That's why reports of China considering more oil purchases from the United States matter. It's not because Beijing suddenly loves Houston crude, but because it's the fastest way to reduce dependence on a conflict-prone choke point. To analysts, it's a signal that China is preparing a backup plan. And if that plan moves forward, Iran loses its main bargaining chip. What makes this more complicated is that the US and China are still competing hard across almost every domain, from technology and military power to economics, artificial intelligence, Taiwan, and influence in Africa and Latin America. Yet in the middle of that competition, a surprising overlap of interests has appeared. Both countries don't want Hormuz to become one side's geopolitical weapon, and when the two biggest rivals on the planet suddenly share a goal, people start asking if a larger quiet deal is being built. That question got louder after leaks suggested the closed-door discussion between Trump and Xi went further than the public readout. The American side has been careful with details, with no transcript, no bullet points, and no clear explanation of what was exchanged at the table. That information vacuum gets filled fast, with some saying China is slowly distancing itself from Iran to protect trade with the US, while others say Trump is trying to split the anti-Western bloc by pulling Beijing away from Tehran. The problem is that ambiguity is often more tense than open conflict. The world is now at a point where one small mistake can trigger a domino effect, with oil prices rising, stock markets correcting, supply chains getting disrupted, and militaries going on alert. Everything is connected, so one decision in Beijing can change the flow of money and energy for millions of people outside China. In the middle of all this, a small moment from the summit caught people's attention and left them confused at the same time. Marco Rubio was present in Beijing with the American delegation, even though he has been under Chinese sanctions twice. Technically, those sanctions haven't been lifted, so how did he enter China? The answer sounds like a political thriller. China used a different combination of Mandarin characters for the name Marco. And in Mandarin, one name can be written with several character combinations that sound the same but carry different meanings. It sounds funny, but the message behind it is serious. The tension between the US and China is real, but both sides are still trying to keep communication channels open. They know direct confrontation would destroy too many shared interests. Keeping communication open doesn't mean they trust each other, and that became clear when the conversation turned to Taiwan. According to Chinese state media, Xi Jinping told Trump directly that Taiwan is the most sensitive issue in US-China relations, and mismanaging Taiwan could push the relationship toward open conflict. That wasn't diplomatic fluff, because for Beijing, Taiwan is about national dignity, unification, and historical legitimacy, while for Washington, Taiwan is a strategic point that determines the balance of power in the Asia-Pacific. What made people suspicious was how Trump handled questions from reporters after the meeting. As he left the venue, reporters shouted questions about Taiwan, and Trump answered other questions smoothly. But on Taiwan, he stayed silent. In international politics, silence often carries more weight than a speech. Marco Rubio later tried to calm things down by saying US policy on Taiwan hadn't changed, but that didn't fully erase the speculation. One thing is clear: China moves with a consistent pattern. It doesn't rush, it doesn't act emotionally, and it doesn't chase quick wins. Instead, it builds influence step by step through economics, technology, military capability, artificial intelligence, global infrastructure, and energy. Marco Rubio acknowledged this openly when he said China has a plan to become the world's most powerful country, and it's executing that plan with discipline. Chinese officials are starting to use similar language as well. Some military officials have said the US and China aren't enemies, but competitors within the same global system. It sounds peaceful, but it's strategic, because China wants the world to see it not as a threat, but as an alternative center of global power. Behind all the diplomatic statements, one point remains the focal point, and that's the Strait of Hormuz. The United States, along with Bahrain, is reportedly pushing for a UN resolution to keep the strait open, and recent reports say over 100 countries have backed the proposal. That means most of the world now sees disruption in Hormuz as an international threat, not just a regional problem. Now the attention shifts to two countries that haven't clarified their position: China and Russia. What they will do when the vote comes matters a lot, because if Russia vetoes, that fits the usual pattern, but if China supports the resolution, the message to Iran will be harsh. It would mean Beijing is publicly choosing global economic stability over loyalty to Tehran. That's why the meeting in Beijing matters more than what you see on TV. What's being discussed isn't just trade, not just Taiwan, not just Iran, but the direction of the world for the next several years. Alliances shift, enemies talk in calmer tones, old friends recalculate costs and benefits, and smaller countries realize that decisions made by the giants can determine their fate. The biggest question now is simple: will China continue to stand behind Iran, or will Beijing decide that protecting its own economy matters more than keeping one problematic ally? If China starts to keep its distance, Iran doesn't just lose an oil buyer, it loses the strategic shield that has made the West think twice before turning the screws further. And if that shield disappears, the balance of power in the Middle East changes. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and Turkey will all adjust, global energy prices will find a new equilibrium, and supply chains will look for alternative routes. Tehran then has to decide whether to soften its position or double down. All of this is happening without a declaration of war, without a major speech, and without an official announcement. It's happening through oil import numbers, through the choice of words in a joint communique, through who shows up in the meeting room, and through who stays silent when asked about Taiwan. That's how great powers reshape the world now, slowly, technically, and often invisibly, until the effects show up in the price of goods at the market. So when you see news about Beijing, don't just look at the smiles in front of the cameras. Look at that narrow shipping lane, look at the tankers waiting to enter, and look at the oil import reports changing quietly in the background. That's where the map of global power is actually being redrawn. And this time, Iran may have to face the reality that the one power keeping it safe is recalculating whether keeping it safe is still worth it. What do you think would be Iran's most likely move if China really starts cutting back on Iranian oil purchases?